I was 16 when I last stayed at my grandmother's house. It was supposed to be a short visit, just a few days. My mother had to travel to Lahore for a funeral, and my father was away on a work trip. So I was sent to my nanny's place in the village, a dusty little town at the edge of nowhere, where the air always smelled like smoke and the nights felt too quiet to be natural. I didn't argue. I liked her. She had raised me when I was small, and her voice was one of the few things that still calmed me when I felt anxious. But that summer, something was different. I don't mean the house had changed, it hadn't. Same uneven walls, same creaky wooden doors, same slow-moving fan above the bed that barely pushed air. But the feeling was different. The silence felt heavy this time, like it was waiting for something. She lived alone now. My Nana had passed away 5 years ago, and my uncles had all moved away. It was just her in that house at the edge of the village, with the thorn trees swaying outside her gate and that dry, pale light the village always seemed soaked in. I remember the first day clearly. It was too hot to breathe, and the electricity kept cutting out. My grandmother gave me a steel tumbler full of warm, sugary lemon water and told me not to walk around barefoot, because the floor got so hot it could burn skin. I nodded, half listening, and spent most of the day lying on the rope cot under the neem tree in the courtyard, swatting flies off my arms. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the heat. Something kept pulling me toward the window. It was nothing special, just a wooden frame that opened into the backyard where the old hand pump sat. But I couldn't stop glancing at it. It made me uneasy. I told myself it was stupid, that I was just tired and jittery from all the travel. But then I noticed something. The door to the backyard was open. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough to see part of the yard where the darkness was thickest. And then it closed. Not slammed, not pushed by the wind. It simply, slowly closed, like someone had gently pulled it shut from the other side. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. I stared at that door for at least 5 minutes, waiting for it to open again. It didn't. I tried telling myself it was nothing. A breeze, a draft, the old house settling. I lay down again. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I told my grandmother. She didn't say much, just stirred the lentils she was boiling and said, "Don't open that door after sunset." Her voice was firm, almost cold. That day passed slowly. I tried to distract myself with chores, helped her fetch water, swept the veranda, even tried reading a dusty Urdu novel I found under her bed. But my thoughts kept drifting back to that door, to the way it closed so slowly, so quietly, like it didn't want to be heard. That night, I locked the door myself. I even put an old brick against it. Still couldn't sleep. And this time, it wasn't the door. It was the breathing. It started around midnight. At first, I thought it was my own, but it wasn't. It was coming from just beyond the window. Long, shaky breaths. Inhale, hold, exhale, then silence, then again. I was drenched in sweat, not from heat this time, but from fear. I wanted to call my grandmother, but my throat felt too tight to speak. Then came a knock, just one, soft, right on the wooden frame of the window. My heart stopped. I lay there, unmoving, clutching the sheet to my chest like it could protect me. Then another knock, then two, each one slightly louder than the last. I couldn't take it. I ran to her room. She was awake, sitting cross-legged on her prayer mat, staring straight ahead. I heard someone, I said. My voice cracked. Outside the window. She didn't look at me. "Don't answer it," she said. "What is it?" She finally turned her head, slowly, and looked in my eyes. "It doesn't want in. It wants you to look." I slept in her room that night. I barely slept at all. The next morning, she went out back early, like she always did. I followed, nervously. She was drawing water from the pump when I saw it. A muddy footprint, bare, human, right next to the well. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. That afternoon, it rained suddenly. A short, sharp shower that turned the dust to thick, slippery mud. It cooled the air, but not the tension in my chest. I told myself I'd leave tomorrow. I started packing after dinner. She didn't say anything, just watched me with a sad kind of silence. That night was the worst. The rain had stopped, but the yard was soaked. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, waiting. It didn't take long. The knocking began at exactly 2:01 a.m. 5 knocks. Then silence. Then whispering. At first I thought it was in my head, but it grew louder. "Let me in." The voice was hollow, male, but slow, broken, like he hadn't spoken in years. I covered my ears, pressed the pillow against my head, but the whisper kept coming. Then, this is what broke me. It said my name. My full name. Not just once. 3 times. Each time slower, more distorted. My whole body locked. I couldn't even cry. I was too scared to even be human anymore. Then silence. I stared at the window. I shouldn't have, but I did. I looked, and there, standing beyond the window frame, face barely visible through the gaps in the slats, was someone. Not a monster, not a ghost, just a man. But something was wrong. His skin was gray, soaked, sagging like wet paper. His eyes were wide, like he hadn't blinked in hours. His mouth hung slightly open. He just stared, and I stared back. Then, without warning, he began to knock again, this time faster. Desperate, slamming his fists against the window. I screamed. I ran. My grandmother came running too. When she saw the window, her face went pale. She pulled me behind her, closed the inner door, and jammed the old wooden bolt in place. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep. The next morning, she took me to the bus station. She didn't come with me, didn't hug me goodbye. She just handed me a folded cloth and said, "Burn it if it ever follows you." I never asked what was in it. I got home. I never spoke about what I saw. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I think I hear knocking again. 3 knocks, then my name. And each time, I force myself not to look. Because now I understand what she meant. It doesn't want in. It wants you to see it. And once you do, it never forgets your face. I was 17 this summer. I stayed at my grandfather's place alone. My grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier, and he'd been living alone ever since. He was a tough, silent man. Spent most of his life in that village, raising livestock and fixing whatever broke with his own hands. I hadn't been to his house since I was 10. Life got busy, I guess. My parents offered to go, but he'd only asked for me. He said he needed some help repairing the boundary wall and clearing weeds that had grown wild all around his property. I wasn't thrilled about it. I had planned to spend the summer playing cricket and staying up late watching movies, but something in my father's voice made me say yes. The house was in a village far off the main highway, the kind of place where the roads turned to dirt and the cell signal dropped off the map. His house was one of the last ones on the edge, just before the land turned to forest. It was a 2-room stone house with a sloped metal roof and a front porch made of rough concrete. It hadn't changed much, still smelled of old wood and cow dung, and the well out back still worked if you pumped enough. There was no TV, no internet, no neighbors for at least a half kilometer. Just silence, broken occasionally by the distant thump of an ox cart or the buzz of insects. My grandfather didn't talk much. He mostly pointed at things, expecting me to understand. And I did, mostly. For the first few days, we worked during the day, pulling weeds, fixing the barbed wire, scrubbing the grime from the well's edge. It was hard labor, but honest. Nights were long. He went to bed early, always in his tiny room with the oil lamp and wooden bed. I was given the other room, bare walls, a simple bed, one small shelf, and a narrow wooden window that opened toward the backyard. At night, I'd lie in bed listening to crickets and watching the dim orange glow of the oil lamp in the other room until it went out. After that, there was nothing. No light, no sound, just pure black stillness. On the 6th night, I woke up suddenly. I don't remember hearing anything. My body just jerked awake, like it knew something I didn't. I lay still, trying to figure out what had disturbed me. Then I heard it, a scraping sound. Slow, uneven. It came from outside, near the back window. I froze, staring at the window. The scraping sound continued, like metal dragging on stone. I told myself it was a dog, maybe a wild pig looking for food. But then I heard breathing, right outside the window. Shallow, slow, human. I stayed frozen, afraid to move. The breathing was too close. Whoever was had to be standing directly outside, just on the other side of that thin wooden shutter. Then the breathing stopped, and something touched the window. Just one sound, 3 knocks. Not hard, soft, slow, deliberate. I lay there, heart thumping, until the sun came up. When I opened the window the next morning, I saw scratch marks on the outside stone below the sill. Long, sharp marks, like someone had dragged a knife or nail along the surface again and again. I told my grandfather. He didn't say much, just stared out the window for a long time. Then he said, "Don't open it again at night." That was all. That evening, he placed a bundle of thorny branches under the window. Didn't explain, just did it and walked away. The next night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the ceiling, listening. At around the same time, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard the breathing again. Only this time, it was followed by a whisper. Not words, just a low hiss like someone trying to talk but couldn't quite form speech. Then the tapping returned. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I didn't move. Eventually, it stopped. I thought I was losing my mind. The next day, I walked around the house looking for footprints or any sign someone had been there. Nothing. The earth was too dry and hard to leave tracks. But when I went to the well, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A small pile of dirt had been dug up behind the well. A rough, narrow hole, like someone had been clawing at the ground. I told my grandfather. This time, he didn't even look at me. He just said, "Stay inside after dark. Don't speak. Don't look through the window." That night, I locked the window, tied it shut with rope, shoved a stool under the handle. Still, at exactly 2:23 a.m., the knocks came. 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more, then silence. I wanted to believe it was some prank, a bored neighbor messing with me, but there were no kids here, no curious teenagers, and the nearest house was too far to walk to at night in the pitch dark, and no one cared to watch to know the exact time. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I checked the rope. It was still tied, but something had pushed through the wooden slats from the outside. One of the boards was cracked, splintered inward like someone had pressed their face against it and just pushed. I felt like I was being hunted. During the day, I felt normal again. The sun felt real, grounding. I almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Until the 9th night. This time, the knocks came earlier and louder. 5 this time. I stayed frozen under the blanket, every muscle in my body tight. Then I heard footsteps, soft, slow ones circling the house. Then they stopped, and I heard my grandfather's door creak open. I jumped out of bed and ran to his room. He was still lying down, but his eyes were open. "You heard it, didn't you?" I whispered. He nodded once. Then he said something I'll never forget. It used to come when I was young, too, but I never answered, never looked. I wanted to scream. What was it? Why was it still coming? That night, I didn't sleep at all, and when the knocks came again, I covered my ears and stared at the ceiling until morning. But the final night, the night before I was supposed to leave, was different. It started with silence. Not the usual stillness, but an unnatural quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the usual groan of the wind. Just silence. Then a smell. Rot, like spoiled meat left in the sun. It filled the room slowly. I gagged and covered my mouth. Then the knocks came. Not 3, not 5. Constant. Fast. Desperate. The window shook. And then something whispered my name. My full name. Clear. Precise. From just outside the wood. I backed into the corner of the room, clutching my pillow like a shield. The whisper repeated. Again and again. Each time louder. Until the voice wasn't whispering anymore. It was speaking in a dry, cracking tone like sandpaper on stone. "Let me in." Then silence. Just like that. Gone. The smell faded by dawn. I left that morning. I didn't say goodbye to the house. Or the window. I didn't even look at it. Grandfather didn't come out to see me off. When my dad picked me up, I didn't tell him everything. Just that I was glad to go home. But some nights, I still hear it. That voice. Saying my name. Even though I'm back in the city, surrounded by lights and people. It whispers to me, like it found a way in any way. I was 15 the summer my parents sent me to my grandparents' village. Not for a vacation, not really. My mother needed to be in another city for a few weeks to take care of her sister, who had just had surgery, and my father was swamped with work. They didn't want to leave me home alone, and I guess they figured the quiet village would do me good. Their village was in the middle of nowhere. No phone signal, no internet, and definitely no friend my age. The closest neighbor was almost a kilometer away through winding dirt paths and shoulder-high crop fields. Their house sat at the end of a narrow, rutted road, surrounded by acres of farmland and a few scattered trees that looked more like scarecrows than anything alive. It was an old, creaky two-story place with a roof that leaked and windows that didn't close all the way. They didn't have much: 2 cows, a few hens, and a well they still pulled water from by hand. My grandmother was quiet, the kind of person who said more with looks than words. My grandfather, on the other hand, liked to talk, though mostly about the weather or how the government had ruined the water system again. I didn't mind them, but it was lonely. The only room available for me was the old guest room upstairs. No one had used it in years. They had to sweep away cobwebs and hammer a few wooden slats back into the bed frame before I could even put a mattress on it. There was no fan, no light switch, just a dusty bulb dangling from the ceiling by an exposed wire and a window with rusted latches. You could see almost the entire property from that window: the fields, the tree line, the well, the small shed near the back. It was quiet at night, unnaturally quiet. I wasn't used to that. Where I came from, there were always background noises: cars passing, dogs barking, the hum of electricity. But here, when night fell, the silence pressed in from every direction. No birds, no animals, just the creak of old wood and the faint rustle of wind through brittle trees. It started on the 4th night. I was lying in bed, wide awake, too hot and too restless to sleep. The air was still, and sweat clung to my skin like glue. I rolled over to face the window, thinking maybe some air would help. That's when I saw something. A light, faint, flickering like someone holding a weak lantern out by the shed. At first, I thought maybe my grandfather had forgotten to bring something inside. But it was almost 2 a.m., and the light didn't move like a lantern. It moved differently, unsteady, like it was swaying back and forth, not from being carried, but like it was swinging. I sat up and stared, trying to make sense of it. The light flickered again, almost rhythmically now, like it was pacing, then stopped altogether, just blinked out. I told myself it was probably a firefly or something caught in the breeze. I lay back down, tried to forget it, and eventually drifted into a shallow sleep. The next morning, I asked my grandfather if he had been outside during the night. He shook his head. No, not at that hour. What about the shed? He gave me a strange look. Why would I go there in the dark? I didn't press further. That evening, I checked the shed myself. It was locked with a heavy metal latch. I looked through the crack between the doors, but it was too dark to see inside. There was a faint smell, though, like mildew and old grain. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I left the window open again, hoping for some breeze. Around 2:15 a.m., the light returned. Same place, same swaying motion, but this time I saw more. The light wasn't from a lantern. It was a small flame, like a candle, and someone was holding it. I couldn't see them clearly. Just a shadow, a figure, short, hunched, with slow movements. They walked out from behind the shed, stopped in the open field, and turned to face the house. To face me. My breath caught. I don't know how I knew, but I felt it. This thing, this person knew I was watching. The way it stood still, with that candle flickering under its face, even though I couldn't make out its features, I felt the weight of its stare. Then it did something that made my stomach turn. It raised one hand and waved. A slow, deliberate wave. Not friendly, not playful, just slow. I stumbled back from the window so hard I knocked over the metal jug of water beside my bed. It clanged loudly. My heart was racing. I didn't dare look back out the window. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I told my grandmother. Her face darkened. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she told me, quietly, not to open the window at night anymore. No matter what you see, she said, don't respond. Don't let it know you're there. I wanted to ask her more, but the way she looked at me made it clear she wouldn't answer. Over the next few nights, it came back. Not every night, just enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes the candle would appear behind the shed. Other times it would be closer to the well. Always around the same time. Always just watching. One night, I broke the rule. I was tired, angry, scared. I sat by the window with a flashlight. When the candle appeared again, I turned my beam straight at it. There was no one, no body, no person, just the candle floating above the field, flickering wildly in my beam of light. Then the light died. both the flashlight and the candle. I couldn't breathe. I slammed the window shut and crawled under the bed, shaking. I waited like that until dawn. The next day, I noticed footprints near the shed. Small, bare footprints in the dirt, leading from the back fence to the shed and back. I showed my grandfather. He looked at them, then at me. "Don't go out there again," he said. "Stay inside at night. But someone's coming onto your land." He didn't reply. That night, I bolted the door, shut the window tight, pulled my mattress away from the wall. Still, I heard it. Footsteps outside, crunching on gravel, then something tapping lightly on the window. 3 taps, then silence. 3 more. It went on for hours. I didn't sleep. The next morning, there was a small smudge on the glass, like someone had pressed their forehead against it. I was done. I told my grandparents I was leaving. They didn't argue. Before I left, my grandmother gave me a small, folded cloth with something inside. A tiny iron nail and a piece of red thread. "Keep it with you," she said. I didn't ask why. I never saw the candle again. I don't know what it was. A person? A trick of the light? Something else? But I know this. I wasn't dreaming. And whatever it was, it wanted me to see it. That thought still keeps me up sometimes, even now in the city with lights, locks, and noise. Because silence is the loudest sound when something is watching you. I never really knew my grandfather. He wasn't the kind of man who played games or told stories. My mother said he used to be different, but I never saw that side. When I was sent to stay with him for 2 weeks, I didn't argue. I thought it would be boring. I thought I'd help him on the farm, eat old food, maybe read books with the pages stuck together from age. I didn't think I'd leave afraid to sleep near windows. His house was far from the village. Too far, really. A small, sagging brick structure on the edge of dry fields, near a dense stretch of woods that everyone in the village called the Cut, because the trees grew so close together it looked like the land had been sliced open. Nobody lived near him. The closest house was abandoned, and even that one looked like it hadn't been touched in a decade. He greeted me with a nod. No fool. Just looked me over like I was a stray dog that might be useful. The house smelled of damp clothes and dust. His room was locked from the inside. Always. He gave me a mat to sleep in the open room near the main door. And every night, just before dusk, he shut all the windows and covered them with thick cloth, even though it was blisteringly hot. Why? I asked once. To keep things out. I thought he meant bugs. The first night passed uneventfully. The second, I started hearing sounds outside. At first I thought it was wild dogs. Then I heard something scrape along the outer wall. Not fast, just once, long and slow. I tried to convince myself it was a tree branch in the wind. There were no trees near that wall. I asked him about it in the morning. He ignored me, completely. Just kept cutting dried mango pieces into a steel bowl. By the 4th night, I noticed he always turned off the lights before sunset, not after. Always before, as if darkness was safer. On the 6th night, something happened. I was lying on a mat, half asleep, when I heard the front door move. Not creak, move. I sat up fast. It was still closed, but I could swear it had shifted. Like pressure had been applied from the other side. Not to open it, but to feel it, to test it. Then I heard breathing. On the other side, I waited. I wanted to yell, but my throat dried up. I heard my grandfather get up. His footsteps were slow. No panic. He stood behind the door. He didn't open it. He whispered something, and then the breathing stopped. The next morning, I asked him what he said. He didn't look at me. Just said, "You didn't hear anything. You were asleep." I wanted to go home, but the roads had flooded after a surprise rain, and I was stuck for at least 3 more days. So I started snooping. His room was always locked, but one afternoon, while he was out in the fields, I found the key under a loose tile near the stove. I unlocked the room. It was clean, too clean. No personal belongings. No clothes. No pictures. Just a table, a chair, and the entire wall covered in newspaper clippings. Old clippings. Some yellowed. Some even crumbling. They were all about missing people. Not famous ones. Just locals. From nearby villages. Each with a red marker circle around the age of the missing person. I started counting. There were 11. My stomach turned. That night, I barely slept. I kept the key in my pocket. At 2:12 a.m., the scraping started again. This time from the back wall. I woke up instantly, pulse racing. Then I heard something far worse. I heard a voice. from behind the wall, muffled, like someone was talking into their own hands. I didn't mean to stay. I sat up. My body froze. Then another whisper, more urgent. Don't leave me in here. I stood, walked to my grandfather's door and knocked. He didn't open it. He just said, "You opened the room, didn't you?" I didn't reply. "You weren't supposed to see that." "What is happening?" I asked. Silence. Then, a sentence I still hear in my dreams. Once you hear them, they remember you. I left the next day, didn't wait for the roads to dry. I walked 6 kilometers to the nearest bus stop, past trees that seemed to bend as I passed them, through silence so thick I could hear my heartbeat echo inside my skull. My mother asked me why I came home early. I told her I got sick. I didn't tell her about the voice behind the wall, or how once I pressed my ear to the bricks and heard someone crying, or how I sometimes still hear a knock on my bedroom wall at exactly 2:12 a.m. Just once, then a whisper. I didn't mean to stay. I was 16 that summer when I stayed at my grandparents' house in the village. My parents had asked me if I wanted to go. At first, I said no. I had plans with some school friends, and honestly, I didn't feel like spending a week surrounded by cornfields, old wooden furniture, and flaky ceiling paint. But my mom insisted, so it would be good for me, that I needed a break from the screens and noise. That grandma and grandpa missed me. I ended up saying yes. Their village was small, maybe a few hundred people at most. A bunch of tight, winding paths instead of paved roads. Most houses were made of faded brick or mud, their walls cracked from years of monsoons and harsh sun. You could walk the whole place in 10 minutes. There was a deep stillness there, not the peaceful kind, more like the silence after something has happened, and everyone's waiting for what comes next. My grandparents lived in an old house at the edge of the village, past the well, near the line where the fields start. Their house was bigger than most others in the area, 2 floors with a flat roof, a big courtyard in the center, and narrow wooden stairs that creaked if you even looked at them. It always smelled like turmeric, old wood, and smoke from the clay stove out back. They were happy to see me. Grandpa gave me his usual pat on the back and toothy smile. Grandma hugged me so tightly I could smell her oil-soaked shawl and the faint scent of mustard oil in her hair. The first few days were uneventful. My phone barely worked, and the internet was more myth than reality out there. So I spent most of my time walking around the fields, helping Grandpa bring buckets of water from the hand pump, and watching Grandma cook. Nights were quiet, too quiet. No cars, no fans whirring, just the sound of insects and the occasional call from some bird or animal out in the dark. It was the 3rd night when things started. I was sleeping in the small room next to my grandparents' bedroom. It was once my uncle's room when he was younger, but now it was mostly used for storage. They cleared some space for me. I had an old bed with a stiff mattress, a small window that didn't open all the way, and a wooden door that scraped the floor whenever I opened or closed it. Because the air was so humid, I decided to hang my wet clothes on the door frame to dry overnight. I had hand-washed a few shirts and jeans in a bucket out back, and figured they'd dry faster in my room, near the window. That's how my grandma did it too. It was normal out there. I went to bed around 10 p.m. The air was still and warm, the ceiling fan above me doing its best to move the thick heat. I fell asleep fast, my body exhausted from the heat and the heavy meals. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., I woke up. There was no sound, no sudden noise that shook me awake. I just opened my eyes, slowly, like something in me wanted me to be conscious. At first, I didn't move. Just lay there, eyes half open, trying to figure out what time it was. Then I noticed something strange. The clothes I had hung on the doorframe were moving. Not wildly, just slowly swaying back and forth, like someone was brushing through them. I squinted through the darkness. There wasn't enough wind. The window wasn't open wide enough, and the ceiling fan wasn't strong enough to make them move like that. Then I saw something. Just behind the curtain of my hanging clothes, I caught a glimpse of a shape, legs thin and pale, barely visible in the darkness. But they weren't normal. They were gray, veiny, and bent awkwardly at the knees. I blinked, trying to adjust my eyes, and that's when I saw the fingers. They were long, too long, each one about the length of a pen. Thin, sharp at the tips with skin that looked like dried rubber. They moved with this slow, twitching rhythm, pushing aside my clothes, feeling them like a child playing peekaboo. But it wasn't a child. It stepped forward. The full figure slowly emerged from behind my clothes. It was tall, way too tall to fit normally under the doorway. Its back was hunched, its shoulders sharp like broken bones under skin. It wore what looked like a torn, faded hospital gown. The kind patients wear. Only this one was so old and stained it barely held together. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees, and its stomach bulged outward like it had swallowed something heavy and just left it there. Then I saw its face. Its head was massive, bulbous at the top like an alien skull. No hair, no eyebrows, just wrinkled gray skin stretched tight. Its eyes were huge, unnaturally round, and had no eyelids. They stared at me without blinking, unblinking, or with tiny pupils that didn't seem to move. Its mouth was small and puckered like someone endlessly sucking on an invisible straw. And it was moving, slurping quietly, lips twisting, mouth sucking at nothing. I couldn't move. I tried. I really tried. My whole body felt like it had sunk into the bed, heavy and stiff like something was sitting on my chest. I kept my eyes open and locked on it, afraid that if I looked away, it would be standing right over me. I tried calling out to my grandparents, whose room was just next to mine. Tried saying Nanny or Dada, but my throat locked up. I managed to move my right hand and reach for the bed frame. I slapped it lightly, hoping the sound would carry through the wall. The thing just stared, not moving, not blinking, just watching me. Its fingers twitched, and its head tilted slightly, as if curious, like it was wondering how I could see it. And I was wondering the same thing. I kept slapping the wood with more strength. Finally, I heard movement from the next room, a creak, then a soft voice, my grandmother calling out, half asleep. The door between our rooms opened, and the moment the light spilled in from the hallway, it was gone, just gone, like it had melted into the floor or never been there. My clothes still swayed slightly, as if something had just brushed through them. I sat up, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. My grandmother looked confused, asking if I had a bad dream. I nodded. I couldn't tell her the truth. I didn't know how. What would I even say? The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was the heat. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe my brain just snapped for a second. But deep down, I didn't believe that. Because the next night, something else happened. It started with a sound. A slow creak of the door. Except I had locked it this time. I had made sure. I had pulled the rusty latch down and even jammed a stool in front of it. But somehow, the door creaked anyway, like someone was testing it from the outside. Then the tapping started. Light, delicate taps on the wooden part of the window. Not from the wind. They came in twos and threes, too rhythmic to be random. I stared at the window for an hour before I fell asleep. And in my sleep, I felt something touching my legs. Not once. Not quick. It went on for what felt like minutes. Soft but firm pressure, like cold hands rubbing up and down my shins. I tried to wake up, but felt like I was half submerged in something, like I was floating just beneath reality. I finally jolted awake at dawn. My legs were cold. My sheets were slightly pulled down. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I told my grandfather. Not everything, but enough. He looked at me, silent, eyes narrowing. Then he said, "Don't sleep with your door open, and don't leave clothes hanging overnight. That's all. No explanation. No concern." That scared me more than the thing itself. The rest of the week, I barely slept. I stayed awake until the roosters crowed, staring at the door, refusing to blink for more than a second. I kept the window shut and tied my clothes into a bundle under the bed. Still, I heard the sounds, the tapping, the creaking. Once I even heard breathing, long, slow inhales right behind the door. I left the village earlier than planned. My parents didn't ask why. Maybe they already knew something was wrong, or maybe they thought I just didn't like a quiet life. Months passed. I didn't see the thing again, didn't hear anything strange, but I kept the habits. I never sleep with the door open. I don't hang clothes near where I sleep. I don't ignore that cold feeling in my legs when I wake up. Later, my uncle, who used to live in that room, told me he never liked it either. Said he always kept the light on, that something used to scratch the walls when he was a kid. He laughed it off, but I didn't. I've never been back to that village. My grandparents still live there, but I only call. I haven't set foot in that room again. I don't know if what I saw was real. A hallucination, sleep paralysis, something old the village forgot how to explain. All I know is this: it saw me, and it was surprised I saw it. That's what keeps me up at night even now. Because I keep thinking, what if next time it won't disappear when someone walks in? What if next time I blink just a second too long and it moves? I didn't get rid of my mirrors. That felt too dramatic. But I started changing my behavior around them. I'd brush my teeth without looking, shave with my head tilted slightly away. Even in the bathroom at work, I found myself washing my hands while staring at the faucet instead of my reflection. If I caught my eyes in the mirror, I'd hold the gaze for a second too long, waiting for something to blink wrong again. It never did, but the waiting was the problem. The fear wasn't that I would see something. It was I didn't tell my girlfriend about any of this. I think, in a way, I wanted to protect her from knowing it hadn't stopped. She'd finally stopped flinching when the cabinet came up in conversation. I wasn't going to drag her back into that headspace unless I had a damn good reason. But the truth is, I didn't stop thinking about it. About the cabinet. About the mirror. I kept revisiting the moment I saw the silhouette. How it had just stood there, no motion, no face, just form. If it was some kind of hallucination, why could she describe seeing the same thing in a completely different room a moment later? If it was suggestion, why had her mom, who hadn't even known what we saw, mentioned shadows? I became obsessed in the quietest way. I didn't tell anyone, didn't scribble in a journal or hunt through paranormal forums. I just started collecting dots, patterns, tiny things. I noticed that every time I passed a mirror, anywhere, I get a flash of feeling. The temperature in my chest would drop a few degrees. I'd blink slower. My shoulders would tense like I was bracing for something. And once, just once, I walked into a public restroom at a movie theater and stopped cold. I had the strangest sense that I'd been there before. Not in a deja vu way, in a watch way. Like something had already been inside the room, and I was late to a meeting I didn't want to attend. Then there was the cabinet. I thought it would end once they stored it. Out of sight, out of mind. But about a month later, I was at her house again, and her dad mentioned, completely offhand, that the storage unit had been broken into. Not cleaned out, just open. No sign of forced entry. Nothing stolen. But one thing had been moved. The cabinet. Not even stolen. Just moved across the room. He laughed when he said it. Said maybe the movers had forgotten to lock it right. That maybe someone just wanted to see what was inside and got creeped out by the dolls. But he said the mirror was cracked. It hadn't been before. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The image of a cracked mirror in the dark, in a closed storage unit, rattled in my brain like a loose screw. I stared at my own bathroom mirror for over an hour before covering it with a towel. That became my new ritual. Before bed, I'd throw a towel or t-shirt over any reflective surface in the room. Laptop screen, bathroom mirror, even my phone screen if it was too dark. It sounds stupid. I know it does. But I slept better with the glass covered. Then something happened that brought it all back hard. I got a package in the mail. No return address. No name. Just a small cardboard box the size of a shoebox, taped shut with brown packing tape. I thought maybe it was something I ordered and forgot about. But when I opened it, my stomach turned cold. Inside was a single porcelain doll, wrapped in yellowed newspaper. Its face was chipped on one side, and its dress, a faded blue, was identical to one of the dolls in the cabinet. I didn't say anything. Not to her. Not to anyone. I took it outside, wrapped it in 2 plastic bags, and threw it in the dumpster behind my building. But for the next 2 nights, I swear I heard a faint clinking noise, like porcelain tapping against wood. Not loud, just enough to keep me awake. The thing is, I started to wonder if any of it was actually connected. Maybe I was making it worse by tying threads that weren't really there. I thought about going to a therapist, explaining what I'd seen, what I'd felt. But how do you do that without sounding unhinged? Hi, I'm here because I'm afraid of antique furniture and my own reflection. It didn't feel like something I could unpack in 50-minute sessions. So I did something different. I drove out to the storage facility. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't even really plan it. One Saturday, I just got in the car and went. I remembered the name from a label on a moving box at her house. It took me half an hour to find the right location. It was a plain facility, gray walls, roll-up doors, gravel lot. No one was in the office. I waited until a car pulled up and someone punched in the gate code, then slipped in behind them. I knew roughly where their unit would be. I didn't know the number, but I recognized the side of the lot from when her dad showed us a photo of the break-in. I walked slowly, checking each roll-up door, listening. The whole place was silent, except for the hum of the highway nearby and the occasional rattle of wind. When I found the unit, I stood there for a long time. It was locked. Of course it was, but the padlock looked newer than the others. Shiny, like it had just been replaced. I didn't try to open it. I didn't break in, but I stood with my ear near the metal for at least 5 minutes. I don't know what I expected to hear. What I did hear was my own breath, but there was something under it, barely there, a dull ticking, like a clock, not steady, not rhythmic, just occasional. I left without looking back. I didn't sleep that night either. At some point, I realized the most disturbing thing wasn't what I'd seen in the mirror or the doll or the silhouette. It was how quiet everything was around it, how no one really reacted, how we just moved on, like people do after something uncomfortable happens. The world didn't stop. The news kept scrolling. The traffic lights worked. But I had changed. I've gone back to that living room twice since. The space looks normal now. Airy. Clean. There's a plant in the corner where the cabinet used to be. Her mom bought a bright orange armchair to fill the space. Nothing feels heavy anymore. But every now and then, when the light hits just right, I can see a faint rectangle of discoloration on the floor, where the cabinet once stood, like the room remembers. And I think about that cabinet sitting in storage. Maybe untouched, maybe not, maybe moved again, maybe broken down. But what sticks with me most is that knife doll. The one I never saw arrive. The one that shouldn't have been there. The one that maybe, just maybe, followed me home. Not as a curse, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that some things don't want to be forgotten. Some objects carry more than dust and age. And sometimes, when we let them too close, they don't just show us what they've seen, they show us what we've been ignoring. They hold up a mirror, and they wait. It happened when I was 16. The year was uneventful for the most part. Just school, stress, and the usual high school routines. My grandmother had come to stay with us for a few days that week. She was visiting from the village, and since we didn't have a guest room ready, she shared my room. I didn't mind. She was quiet, always smelling of the kind of soap I associated with old wooden drawers, and she snored very softly. It was comforting in a way. I remember the night so clearly because it started like any other. I stayed up a little late scrolling through my phone, then set it down and rolled onto my side, pulling my blanket over my shoulder. The dim light from the street lamp outside spilled in faintly through the slats of the blinds, giving the room a faint glow. My clothes, freshly washed earlier in the day, were hanging in the doorway on a plastic hanger that I hooked over the frame. That was normal for me. I didn't like using the dryer much and preferred them to air dry overnight. Sometime during the night, I woke up. I don't know exactly why. Maybe it was a small sound, maybe just one of those sudden, random awakenings that happen sometimes. But I remember my eyes opening slowly, the hazy blur of sleep still over my vision. The first thing I noticed was that my clothes were moving, just gently at first, like there was a soft breeze brushing through them. But the fan wasn't on. The window was shut. I blinked a few times, trying to clear my vision, and then noticed something behind the clothes. Not a shape exactly, just something off. Something gray moving between the fabric. At first I thought it might have been my eyes playing tricks on me. I'd just woken up. It was dark, but then I saw legs, thin, gray veinal legs. Not like normal human legs. These are almost too thin, like sticks, but sinewy and long. They looked like someone had wrapped cling film around twisted ropes of muscle and then stretched it out unnaturally. I didn't move. I just stared, still half asleep, still hoping it was just a dream. Then I saw what I thought were long, thin sticks poking through the clothes, shifting the fabric gently. My sleepy brain tried to make sense of them. Wires? Coat hangers? But they were moving too fluidly. They flexed like fingers. That's when I realized they were fingers. Extremely long, pointed fingers, almost skeletal, but not quite bone. Each digit ended in a sharp point, like broken chopsticks. They moved slowly, gently, threading through the fabric of my clothes like someone browsing through a rack in a store. I didn't want to believe it. My body froze, completely still. My eyes widened as I stared, trying to understand what I was looking at. My breathing slowed, not out of calmness, but fear, raw, crawling, primal fear. Then, through a gap in the clothes, I saw its face. And it was nothing like anything I'd ever seen before. The skin was the same grayish tone as the legs, mottled, veiny, stretched tight over bones. The head was large, elongated at the top like a cone, but slightly lopsided, as if it had grown that way by mistake. Its eyes were huge, glossy, black orbs with no eyelids, just unblinking wetness that reflected the dim light. The mouth was small and puckered, like it had been pursed shut too long, and it moved as if it was sucking on something, an invisible candy or maybe just the air itself. Its chin was long and sharp, jutting downward unnaturally. It was wearing a pale hospital gown, torn down the back where a hunched, bony protrusion stretched the fabric wide. The way it stood there, leaning slightly forward, its thin arms raised and fingers still combing through the shirts I'd hung up, made it look like some twisted, broken patient from a place long forgotten. I stared at it, and it stared back. There was no expression in its eyes, but somehow I could feel that it was just as surprised as I was. Like it hadn't expected me to see it. My body finally reacted. I tried to scream, tried to call out to my grandmother, who was lying just a few feet away on the mattress near the corner of the room. But my throat locked up. I couldn't form the words. My lips moved, my lungs pushed, but nothing came out. My hand shot out, grabbing her shoulder, shaking it hard. She grumbled in her sleep, not waking fully. I looked back to the doorway. The thing hadn't moved. It was still staring. My fingers dug harder into her shoulder, finally managing to get a louder noise out of my mouth. Something like a gasp mixed with a cry. She stirred, half sat up, blinking in confusion. I looked back at the door again. It was empty. No gray figure. No rustling clothes. Nothing. The only sound in the room was the creak of the bed springs and my shallow breathing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, I said nothing. I went through my routine numbly, ate breakfast, nodded when spoken to, pretended everything was normal. But it wasn't, because this wasn't the first strange thing that had happened. In the weeks before that night, there were other signs, things I brushed off at the time. My bedroom door would slam shut on its own, even when there wasn't a draft. A couple times it locked itself from the inside while I was outside the room. Once, I had to wait for nearly 20 minutes before it somehow unlocked itself again. Other nights, I woke up feeling off, like I hadn't been alone in the room. Once I could have sworn I felt hands, multiple hands, lightly touching my feet and legs while I lay half asleep. The sensation vanished the second I fully woke, but I still remember the cold pressure, the way my muscles tensed in reflex. I started having vivid nightmares. They were strange and disturbing, not even scary in a normal way. Just images, lots of them. Endless white rooms with no walls. Long halls filled with nothing but mirrors. A gray shape crawling on the ceiling. A cold hand reaching through a floor vent. Still, I convinced myself it was all stress. School was rough. I was staying up too late. Maybe my brain was just cracking a little under pressure. But after I saw him, I couldn't brush it off anymore. That morning, I told my parents. I sat them down and explained everything. I expected disbelief. Laughter maybe, but they didn't laugh. They listened. Then, without saying much, they contacted someone. A week later, a man came to the house. A priest or something like that. Not the stereotypical kind with robes and incense. He wore jeans and a windbreaker. Quiet guy. Looked around my room, muttered some words, sprinkled something I couldn't identify along the door frame and windows. I didn't ask questions. I just watched. He said something about not letting your room carry too much weight. Whatever that meant. Then he left. After that, things changed. The nightmares stopped. The door never locked itself again. And I never saw anything in the doorway again. Just clothes swaying slightly sometimes, but never moving on their own. I don't know what really happened. Was it something real? Something I genuinely saw? Or was it my mind? Stressed, overwhelmed, paranoid from sleep deprivation? I'll never know for sure. I used to think about it all the time. Try to make sense of it. Read things online, watch documentaries, even browse through strange subreddits late at night. I found stories that sounded similar, too similar. People describing almost the exact same figure. Gray, thin, long fingers, hospital gown, huge eyes. But reading more didn't bring peace. It just deepened the confusion. Eventually, I stopped looking. I moved out at 18. Got a small place. Normal apartment, clean walls, bright windows. But one rule has stuck with me ever since that night. I never sleep with the door open. Not once. Not even when it's hot. Not even when I'm sick. Not even when I'm alone and I know there's nothing there. The door stays shut because deep down, no matter how much I try to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, just a dream or hallucination. I know what I saw. And worse, I know it saw me too. A strange summer at Dada's farm. I was 25 when I returned to the farmhouse. I hadn't been back in nearly 12 years. My grandfather, Dada, we all called him, had passed away the previous winter. The house had been sitting empty since, though technically it still belonged to my uncle-in-law. He lived in Karachi and hadn't visited the village in over a decade. I'd heard he was looking to sell the land eventually, but the house itself needed cleaning, documenting, and some basic maintenance before anything could happen. My mother was too overwhelmed to deal with it. She had lost both her father and her job in the same month. So she asked me if I could go stay at the farmhouse for a while. Just for a few weeks, she said. Fix up what needs fixing. Take photos. Check the roof. Make sure no one's squatting there or trying to steal the old furniture. You used to love it there, she said. I didn't. I remembered hot days, giant mosquitoes, rusty fans that sounded like helicopters, and the smell of something always rotting in the shade. But I also remembered Dada, with his kind smile and leathery hands. I remembered early mornings when he'd take me to the fields to check the water pumps and show me the birds nesting under the trees. So I agreed. It took me nearly 12 hours to reach the village by bus, rickshaw, and then on foot. The heat in June was already unbearable. The roads turned from pavement to gravel to nothing. As I approached the house on foot, all I could hear was the wind sweeping over dry fields and the occasional bark of a distant dog. The house stood exactly as I remembered. 2 stories, flat rooftop, faded blue walls with chunks of plaster missing, iron bars on the windows, a wooden door that looked like it hadn't been painted since I was a child. When I pushed it open, a wave of hot, stale air hit me. The kind of heat that builds up in sealed spaces. The kind that makes dust feel like it has weight. I stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The same dusty set of wooden chairs in the front room. The same carved mirror in the hallway. The kitchen was a mess. Cobwebs, blackened pots, a dried lizard corpse stuck to the wall. The upstairs was worse. The air up there was dead and heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. I only glanced at the rooms and closed the doors again. I decided then I'd sleep downstairs. There was a small cot in the storage room behind the kitchen. It was cramped but cool. No windows, which suited me fine. I didn't like looking out into empty fields at night. I made a list of repairs, checked the wiring, fixed the back door lock, clean out the drains. During the day, I stayed busy. But at night, when the work stopped, the house started to feel different. The first few nights, I told myself the noises were just the house settling. Creaks in the ceiling, something shifting behind the walls, the scrape of wood or metal or cloth being dragged lightly across the floor above me. I didn't go upstairs at night. Not once. I'd bolt the kitchen door, lock myself in the back room, and put on music to drown everything out. But the sound still made it through. One night, around 2 a.m., I was half asleep when I heard what sounded like footsteps on a rooftop. Not pigeons, not wind. Footsteps. Human. Deliberate. I waited, heart thudding, staring at the ceiling like it might give me an answer. Then silence. I told myself there was nothing. Maybe a villager passed by. Maybe a stray goat climbed the stairs. I didn't check, but the next day, when I went to the roof, I found something that didn't make sense. A single brick had been moved from the edge of the parapet wall. It had always been there. A chipped red brick wedged in place. Now it was lying flat near the middle of the roof. No footprints, no signs of disturbance. Just a brick, oddly clean, like it had been scrubbed. I put it back and came down quickly. That night, I locked the upstairs door from the inside and jammed a chair into the knob. I don't know what I thought it would do, but it made me feel better. For a day or two, things were quiet again. Then the noises returned, worse this time. Not just footsteps, but dragging, scratching, as if something or someone was slowly moving furniture around upstairs. But when I checked in the morning, everything looked untouched, except for one thing. The bedroom door at the far end of the hallway, the one that had always been shut, was now slightly open. That door was stiff. It took effort to move it, and I hadn't touched it. Inside was a room I didn't remember. Not because it had changed, but because I'd simply never been allowed inside it as a child. It was Dada's old study, or storage, or maybe just a space he didn't want people in. Dust covered everything. The walls had water damage. A thin wire hung from a ceiling fan, like a spider's web. There was a desk with a broken drawer, and a chair with a snapped leg. And in the corner, hidden under a worn-out sheet, was a large metal trunk. I didn't touch it that day. I closed the door, this time pushing against it until it clicked shut again. That night, I dreamed someone was sitting on my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, clutching my own arms like I'd been caught doing something wrong. The next morning, I opened the trunk. Inside were old clothes, moth-eaten shirts, yellow documents, photographs, letters. Some of them were in English, others in Urdu. I could barely read the handwriting, but what I could make out disturbed me. There were mentions of a boy, someone who used to live on the farm. Not a relative, a laborer maybe, a helper, a tenant's son, someone who wouldn't stop wandering, someone who kept going where he shouldn't, someone who refused to stay quiet. The notes stopped suddenly. The last letter was dated October 1994. It ended with a single line in shaky handwriting. I had no choice. I read that line over and over, feeling my chest tighten. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, the only place in the house with light that didn't flicker. I made tea just to keep my hands busy. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the rooftop door creak. I froze. I had locked that door, bolted it. I waited, not breathing. Then I heard slow steps descending the stairs above me. Not in a rush, not sneaky, just deliberate. I grabbed the flashlight and the small wrench I'd been using to fix the pipe earlier and stood in the hallway, listening. The steps stopped halfway down the staircase. Silence. I never went to check. As sunrise, you pecked to beg. I didn't call my mother. I didn't wait for her to ask. I left the house, walked to the nearest paved road, and paid a passing tractor driver to take me to the bus station. I never went back. The house was sold 2 years later. Bulldozed. Someone built a poultry shed over the plot. But sometimes I think about the trunk, the documents, the locked room, the sounds that always came from upstairs, even though no one else was supposed to be there. And I wonder if I had kept reading those letters, if I had pulled up the floorboards in that back room, what would I have found? I'll never know, but I'm not sure I want to. I was 24 when I went to live in my grandfather's farmhouse for the summer. It wasn't planned. My grandfather had fallen on the back steps during the early spring, fractured his hip, and been moved to a rehabilitation center 2 towns over. The farmhouse, isolated 2-story and surrounded by empty fields, had been left empty since. I hadn't been there in years, not since I was maybe 11 or 12. But my mother insisted someone needed to check on the place before mold took over or thieves stripped the copper wiring. She suggested I go. I was between jobs, between apartments, too, if I'm honest. I didn't exactly have a better offer. So, early May, I packed my car and drove 6 hours out to the village where my mother had grown up, to the same road I barely remembered, and pulled up the dirt driveway to my grandfather's house. It was just as I remembered it. Red roof, chipped paint, porch swing that leaned slightly left. No neighbors in sight, just fields, power lines, and wind that never seemed to stop blowing. The place was quiet, too quiet. Inside, it smelled of old wood, dry dirt, and something faintly musty. Like time had stopped. The house creaked like it had a voice, groaning under the weight of age. I opened all the windows, dusted off a chair, and sat down in what used to be the reading room. The wind moved through the open doors like a breath. It didn't take long to get settled. There was no internet, barely any cell signal. The nearest store was 15 minutes by car, and the road didn't even have a street name. Just a number and a faded sign nailed to a post. The bedroom I chose was on the ground floor. The upstairs had always felt weird to me. As a kid, I used to run up those stairs and instantly want to come back down. I didn't know why. There was nothing wrong with them. Just 2 bedrooms, a small hallway, and a storage room at the far end. But something about the upstairs made me uneasy. That first week, I kept to a strict schedule. Wake up with the sun, sweep the porch, check the fuse box, drive into town for groceries, return before sunset. I read in the afternoons, cooked in the evenings, and slept early. It wasn't until the second week that things started to change. It began with the noises. I was reading one night in the living room around 9:30 p.m. when I heard something move upstairs. Just a faint sound, like footsteps. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying not to be heard. I froze. There was no one else in the house. The doors were locked. I turned off the lamp and listened. Nothing. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe some old wood finally giving in after a hot day. I went to bed that night trying to forget about it, but it stayed in the back of my mind. A couple days later, I heard it again. This time I was sure. 2 steps, then a creak, then silence, like someone had taken 2 careful steps and paused. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, staring up into the dark. I didn't go up that night. Instead, I shut my bedroom door and dragged the desk in front of it. Not because I believed someone was up there, but because I didn't want to be wrong. A few more days passed. The noises continued. Always upstairs. Always just a few steps. Never a full walk across the floor. Just presence. One night, I couldn't sleep. I left my room around 2 a.m. to get water. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard it again. This time, it wasn't footsteps. It was breathing. Faint. Slow. From directly above. I stared at the ceiling for a full minute, holding my breath. It stopped after a while. I returned to my room and didn't leave until morning. After that, I started investigating during the day. Looking through the upstairs rooms, checking for animals, loose boards, anything that might explain the sounds. Nothing. The back room, the storage room at the far end of the hall, was always cold, even during the hottest days. I opened it once. Inside was just a dresser, a broken bed frame, and an old rolled-up rug leaning against the wall. I didn't go back in. By the end of the 3rd week, I was barely sleeping. Every night, the same sounds, soft steps, weight shifting, a chair creaking when no one had sat in it. Always from above. One morning, I found the rug in the storage room had unrolled itself. Not fully, just enough to expose one end. There was something smeared on the wood beneath it. At first I thought it was dirt, but when I bent down to look closer, it looked more like grease, dark and thick, like someone had dragged something heavy across the floor. I cleaned it, rolled the rug back, didn't say a word. The next night, I locked my bedroom door again and left the hallway light on. I lay awake until dawn, listening. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps again. This time, they didn't stop after a few steps. They moved across the floor above me, slow and steady. Then silence. Then something new, the sound of the upstairs hallway door creaking open. That door hadn't moved since I arrived. I got out of bed, slowly, and opened my door, just a crack. The hallway was empty, but the house didn't feel empty. The air was thick, like something was in it, like the silence was holding its breath. I didn't sleep that night. The following afternoon, I finally called my mom. I didn't tell her everything, just that I wasn't sleeping well, that something felt off. She got quiet. Then she said, "That house always made me uncomfortable. I used to hate going upstairs when I was little." I asked her why. She hesitated, then said, "There's a room at the back, right? Past the bedrooms." "Yeah," I said, "the one with the rug. Don't go in there." That was all she said. I didn't ask why. For the next week, I avoided the upstairs completely. I cooked, cleaned, drove into town, pretended things were fine. But every night, the sound continued. Heavier now. Not just footsteps, scraping, dragging, something shifting in the walls. I started keeping a kitchen knife under my pillow. I told myself it was silly, but I still did it. Then came the final night. It was the middle of June. Hot, heavy air pressing against the windows like it wanted to get in. I lay in bed, eyes open, knife under my pillow. At 2:38 a.m., I heard the first sound. A single step just above my bed. Then another. Then the sound of something falling. Not heavy, but sharp. Like a glass hitting the floor. Then silence. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Nothing. I finally got out of bed and crept into the hallway. Everything was still. I went to the bottom of the stairs, flashlight in hand, and listened. No sounds. I climbed the stairs slowly. Each one groaned under my weight. At the top, I saw the door to the storage room was open. I had closed it. I remember doing it that morning. I walked to it, heart pounding. Inside, the room was dark. The rug was rolled open completely. The wood beneath it was scraped, stained, and there were marks on the wall. Scratches. Not fresh, not deep, but there. And the floor beneath the window had been disturbed. Dust rushed away in a clear, deliberate circle, like someone had been sitting there for a long time. Watching, I turned and left. I didn't run. I walked down the stairs, out the front door, and sat in my car until the sun came up. I packed my things the next morning and left. I haven't been back. My grandfather passed that winter. The farmhouse was sold the following year. Sometimes I wonder who lives there now. If they hear the footsteps. If they've noticed a rug doesn't stay rolled up. If they've gone into the room at the back of the house and sat where someone once watched the fields. I never saw anyone. I never found a body or blood or evidence of anything at all. But something was in that house. Not a ghost, not a creature, just something that used to be someone. And that's worse, somehow, because you can't explain it away. You can't name it. You can't understand why they never left. But I heard them, every night. And if I'd stayed longer, I think I would have seen them too. I was 17 the last summer. I stayed in my grandparents' house. They lived way out in the country, in one of those lonely two-story farmhouses surrounded by endless fields and a dirt driveway that got so muddy when it rained you couldn't leave for hours. No neighbors for at least a mile. Just tall cornfields, wind that never stopped, and the creak of wood that seemed to come from nowhere. It was supposed to be a break, a quiet place to clear my head after a bad semester. My mom thought it'd be good for me to unplug for a while. Reset. So I packed a bag and got dropped off in mid-June. The first couple days were boring, but peaceful. My grandpa taught me how to fix the lawnmower blade. My grandma baked too much. I'd read on the porch, walk down the dirt path to the old barn, or sit on the back steps watching bugs flicker through the tall grass. The house itself was old, creaky, like any rural home that had weathered 50 winters and had no central air. My room was upstairs, corner of the house, slanted ceiling, narrow bed, the smell of dry wood and mothballs. At night, it got quiet, real quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear your own heartbeat if you sat still enough. It was the third night when I started noticing things. I woke up just after 2 a.m. because of soft thump. Not loud, more like someone dropped a shoe on the floor. I sat up, heart pounding for no good reason. Listened, nothing. Then, just as I lay back down, I heard it again. Thump. It was above me. There was no attic in that part of the house, just roof, but it sounded like it was directly over my bed. I chalked it up to a squirrel or raccoon walking across the shingles. Forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I mentioned it to my grandpa while we were changing a light bulb on the porch. He said, probably just wind knocking something loose. Happens sometimes. He didn't even look at me when he said it. But that night, it happened again. This time it wasn't just a single sound. It was a series of slow, heavy scrapes, like something was being dragged across the ceiling. Then it stopped. Then 2 knocks. Precise. Intentional. I didn't sleep much after that. By the 5th night, it changed again. I had just laid down, window cracked to let in some air, when I heard movement, this time not above me, but inside the wall. A faint shuffling. Dry. Rhythmic. Not like rats or mice. Too slow. More like dragging fingers along the inside of drywall. Then it stopped, and I swear to God I heard breathing. Just once. Sharp. Inhale. Then gone. I didn't tell anyone. The next day, I took a walk through the cornfield, tried to shake the nerves out of my system. I told myself it was nothing, just a weird house, creaky wood, my imagination. But when I came back inside, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was dirt on the stairs. Not muddy footprints. Just dusty, smeared soil like someone had walked barefoot with dirty feet up and down the staircase. But both my grandparents wore slippers indoors, and I had been outside with shoes. I quietly cleaned it up, didn't say a word. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time, even though no one ever locked doors in that house. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again, but this time it was footsteps directly outside my door. One step, then another. Slow, careful, like someone trying not to wake me. Then silence. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just stared at the doorknob. And for a second, I thought I saw it twitch. Just the slightest motion. Like pressure, not twisting. Just testing. I must have stayed awake till sunrise, holding a flashlight like a weapon and listening to my own breathing. The next morning, I asked my grandma, casually, if either of them had been up during the night. She blinked, confused, then said, "No, honey. Grandpa sleeps through anything, and I didn't get up once." "What?" I told her I just thought I heard something. She gave me a sad little smile and said, "This house makes noises. Always has." 2 nights later, I went down to the kitchen at midnight to grab a drink. I tried to keep quiet, didn't want to wake anyone. But as I turned on the light, I noticed something off with the back door, the one that leads out to the porch. The lock was turned, not open, just off, like someone had twisted it too far and jammed it slightly. I opened the door and looked outside. There were bare footprints on the porch. Human, barefoot, clear as day, in a small dusty trail like someone had been standing there, unmoving just outside the door. I didn't go back upstairs. I lay on the living room couch with the light on until morning. The next day, I told my mom I was ready to come home. She picked me up that evening. I hugged my grandparents, thanked them, said I'd be back for a weekend before school. I never went back. They still live there. I still get birthday cards in the mail from that address. And sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about the footprints, the quiet breathing in the wall, the doorknob that shifted without turning. And I wonder, if I hadn't locked that door, what would I have seen? I was 15 when I started staying in my grandparents' house more often. My parents had split the year before, and my mom picked up an evening shift that made her worry about me being alone so much. So on weekends, especially during the school year, I'd stay with my grandparents. I didn't mind. They had cable, decent food, and didn't ask too many questions. The house was old, built in the late 60s. One story with a full second floor that nobody used anymore. Just storage, really. They kept the heat vents closed up there to save money, and no one wanted to deal with the steep stairs or the drafty windows. They gave me the guest room on the first floor, which used to be my mom's room when she was a teenager. It was plain, an old twin bed with a creaky headboard, beige carpet, and a closet with mirror doors that rattled when you slid them open too fast. The first night I stayed, I remember lying in bed after everyone had gone to sleep. The house got quiet, like oppressively quiet. Not city quiet, not suburban background noise quiet. Just dead air. No kamingipleiensis. No water pipes. Just stillness. And then I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It came from above, right over my room. Slow, deliberate footsteps. One into the upstairs room to the other. Then silence. I didn't move. I barely breathed. It was so clear, so exact, I couldn't even convince myself it was just a house settling. I stared up at the ceiling like I expected it to cave in. Then I remembered, nobody used the second floor anymore. I told myself it had to be the wind, or maybe something shifting in one of the upstairs boxes. But when it happened again, same sound, same pacing, I felt this tight, cold knot in my chest that wouldn't go away. Eventually, I fell asleep, but I never forgot the sound. After that first weekend, it kept happening. Every visit, always the same. I'd go to bed, the house would go still, and the footsteps would start. Thump, thump, thump. Always the same number of steps. Always the same rhythm. Across the room and back. Nothing more. It never happened during the day. I even walked upstairs once, during daylight, to prove to myself it was just my imagination. The upstairs bedroom was mostly empty. Just a dusty bed frame, some cardboard boxes, and a few old books stacked in a corner. It smelled like dry wood and insulation. Still, I avoided going up there alone again. One time around late October, I brought a friend over. He stayed for the evening, played video games, and left after dinner. That night, the footsteps came again. Only this time, they were faster. No longer slow, thoughtful pacing. They were rushed, like someone crossing the room in a hurry. I sat straight up in bed. I stared at the ceiling, so long my eyes burned. My hand was on my phone, hovering over the flashlight app, but I didn't turn it on. I was afraid to draw attention to myself. The footsteps stopped. Then something scraped. Just once. Like furniture being dragged an inch or two. That was new. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, over breakfast, I asked my grandpa if he ever heard noises from upstairs. He just looked at me with this tired expression and said, "That house creaks like a coffin lid." Then he went back to reading the paper. But the way he said it stuck with me. Like it wasn't just a figure of speech. I was 15 the last time I stayed in that house overnight. It was early December. Cold outside. You could see your breath indoors some mornings. My grandma had already put up a small Christmas tree in the corner of the living room and lit a few cinnamon candles that made the whole house smell nostalgic and warm. That night, I followed my usual routine. Brushed my teeth, checked the door lock twice, got into bed and laid facing the wall. I left a small night light on, something I'd started doing ever since the footsteps began. Around 1 a.m., I woke up. I didn't hear the footsteps this time. I heard breathing. Slow, controlled, close. I didn't turn over. I couldn't. I was paralyzed by something I couldn't explain. The air felt wrong. Heavy, not like fear. Like someone else was in the room. I closed my eyes and listened. The breathing wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone in the hallway. It was coming from above. Not the ceiling. Not the attic. Directly above my bed. Like someone was crouched up there, matching my breathing with their own. A split second behind. Like a mimic. Then it stopped, followed by the softest creak I'd ever heard. I waited an hour before I moved. I turned on every light in the room, took my pillow and blanket, and curled up on the floor outside my grandparents' bedroom door. I told them I had a fever and didn't want to be alone. They never asked for details. I stopped staying over after that. Started making excuses. Told them I had projects due. That I was sleeping better in my own bed. They didn't push. I still visit, but only during the day. And I never walk past the base of the stairs. The house is still there. My grandparents are still there. So, is whatever walks that upstairs room at night. I never found a body. Never found a broken window or open door. No cold spots. No ghost stories. Just footsteps, breathing, and that feeling like you're being watched by something that has no reason to blink. My grandparents' house sits at the edge of a quiet neighborhood in northern Illinois, nestled between rows of older homes and a thick band of trees that backs up to the property line. It's not a creepy-looking house. It's well-kept, gray shutters, white siding, a porch swing that creaks when you sit on it too hard. My grandpa repainted the place himself last year, even though he's pushing 80. My grandma still keeps a dish of butterscotch candies by the door like she did when I was a kid. It's a peaceful place, or at least it's supposed to be. I started noticing things there around the age of 15. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small things. Sounds that didn't make sense. Feelings I couldn't quite explain. It always started the same way. I'd be lying in bed at night in the spare room downstairs, and I'd hear footsteps above me. Steady, unhurried, heel tutu, like someone was pacing. At first, I assumed it was my grandparents. But after the third or fourth time, I realized something strange. They both slept downstairs now. My grandpa's back had gotten bad enough that stairs were completely out of the question for him. And my grandma had moved into the front room for easier bathroom access. The entire second floor was empty. That's what bothered me. I asked my grandma once, casually, if either of them ever went upstairs at night. She just shook her head. "We haven't used those rooms in years," she said. "They're mostly just storage now." That confirmed it. Whatever I was hearing, it wasn't them. The layout of the upstairs was simple. A hallway with 2 bedrooms, a linen closet, and an old bathroom that hadn't been touched since the 70s. The bedroom directly above mine used to be my mom's when she was a kid. She told me once she never liked sleeping up there alone. I figured she was just saying that. But the more I stayed over, the more I started understanding why. The footsteps became routine. I'd hear them once or twice a night. Always the same pattern. Start at one end of the room, pause, then return. It wasn't every single night, but enough that I noticed when they were absent. I never went upstairs to check. Not once. It's hard to explain the kind of fear I felt. It wasn't like a jump scare or a sudden jolt. It was slow and deep, the kind of fear that settles in your chest and stays there. I didn't want to know what I'd find. I didn't even want to look at the stairs when I passed by during the day. Then, last winter, something new happened. I had taken time off work to help my grandparents around the house. Shoveling snow, winterizing the windows, that sort of thing. It was a 5-day visit, nothing major. I brought a book, a laptop, and a hoodie with deep pockets where I kept my phone and a pocket knife my dad gave me years ago. On the second night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the air felt wrong. It was too still, too heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting. And just after 2 a.m., the footsteps started. But they were different this time. They weren't pacing. They were moving with purpose. Quicker, heavier, like someone was walking directly across the room with intent. Then I heard something that made my stomach clench, a soft, dragging noise. Not loud, barely audible, but distinct, like fabric brushing against carpet. I sat up, straining to hear. The footsteps stopped. Then there was a loud thud directly above me, like something had fallen or been dropped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I just stared at the ceiling, heart pounding. After a few minutes, I forced myself to lie back down, convinced it was just old junk falling from an overstuffed shelf. I told myself that over and over until I fell asleep. The next morning, I asked if anything had fallen upstairs. My grandma looked puzzled. "We haven't been up there," she said. "What?" I dropped it. I didn't want to explain what I'd heard. I didn't want to start a conversation I wasn't ready to finish. That afternoon, while they were out getting groceries, I decided to go up. I don't know what got into me. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself there was nothing there. That it really was just old boxes and weak floorboards. The stairs creaked under my weight. The air felt colder the higher I climbed, and not in a temperature way. Just off. The door to the bedroom, directly above mine, was open. The room looked mostly the same as I remembered it. Dusty bedspread, a couple boxes of clothes, an old dresser pushed up against the wall. The window blinds were partially open, letting in weak winter light. I stepped inside slowly. The carpet near the center of the room looked different. There was a mark, wide, slightly darker than the rest. A long curve, like something had been dragged in a half circle. I knelt down to look closer. The carpet was indented. You know how, when you move a heavy piece of furniture after a long time, it leaves those deep impressions in the carpet? That's what it looked like. But nothing in the room had moved. The bed was flush with the wall. The dresser was still covered in dust. The boxes hadn't been touched, but the marks were there, fresh. I backed out of the room, slowly, not looking away from the mark until I reached the stairs. That night, I slept with the light on. The next night, I brought the knife to bed with me. The footsteps came again. This time, they didn't stop. They crossed the room upstairs, paused, then crossed again. Then I heard another thud, then silence, and then I heard a creak, not from above, but from outside my door. I sat up, holding the knife tight in my hand, my other hand fumbling for my phone. The hallway was dark. The house was dead quiet. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. I left the next morning. I didn't say goodbye, just texted my grandma that I had to go back for work. That was 3 months ago. I haven't gone back since. They still live there. Nothing bad has happened. They call me every Sunday like always. But I know I won't sleep another night in that house. I know something is wrong in that upstairs room. Maybe it's just the creaks of an old building. Maybe it's air pressure. Maybe it's rodents. Or maybe places hold on to things. Not ghosts. Not spirits. Just impressions. Leftovers. The kind of quiet residue that doesn't show up until the rest of the world is asleep. I try not to think about the mark in the carpet. I try not to think about the dragging sound. But more than anything, I try not to think about what would have happened if I had opened the door that night. Because whatever was walking upstairs, it wasn't trying to hide. It's been almost 10 years since I started sleeping in that room. I'm 23 now. I work full-time. I live in a different city. I've traveled. I've changed. I've grown out of most of my old fears, but not that one. Whenever I go back to visit my grandparents, I still sleep in the same room. They never question it. It's just assumed now they'll be staying there. My grandma always leaves a clean blanket folded at the foot of the bed. My grandpa makes sure the little side lamp is plugged in. Nothing ever changes. They're getting older, slower, softer. But the house, specifically the room upstairs, feels exactly the same. I try not to think about it for a while. When I was in college, I avoided going home much. Told myself it was because of exams or work or schedules. But really, it was because I couldn't stomach another night lying there, watching the ceiling, waiting for it. And it always came, even if I had headphones on, even if I was half asleep, even if I tried not to notice. The footsteps were always there. The last time I stayed for more than a night was last Thanksgiving. It was a longer visit than usual, 5 nights. I arrived Wednesday afternoon, stayed through the weekend, and planned to leave Monday morning. I was determined to sleep better this time. I brought everything, my thickest headphones, a white noise app I paid for, a sleep mask, even one of those sleep assist nasal sprays. I thought maybe if I loaded up my brain with enough distractions, the silence wouldn't find me. Wednesday night was uneventful. I passed out almost immediately and didn't hear a thing. Maybe I was too tired for driving. I woke up surprised that it had been quiet. Thursday night, same thing. Quiet. I started to feel like maybe it was finally over. That maybe something had shifted. I let myself relax a little. Ate too much pie. Played cards with my uncle. Stayed up watching an old western with my grandpa. When I went to bed that night, I didn't even put in my headphones. I thought I'd take the win. That was a mistake. Friday night, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. on the dot. There was no sound, not at first. Just that weird kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting. I sat up, squinted at my phone, and noticed the battery had drained to 3%, even though it had been plugged in. The screen flickered once, then shut off completely. And then, just like always, thump. I froze. Thump, thump. Steady, deliberate. It walked above me, crossing from the side of the room with the closet toward the window. Then it stopped. Then, for the first time in years, it started again. Thump, thump. Back across. Slower. Heavier. It stopped again. I stared at the ceiling. The plaster above me looked the same as ever, slightly yellowed in one corner, a faint watermark near the bed. My eyes are wide open. No headphones. No barrier this time. I could hear everything. The air in the room changed. It felt hotter, like it was pressing in around me. My skin prickled, and then I heard it. Not footsteps, not scratches. Breathing. Slow, shallow, raspy breathing. It wasn't coming from above me. It was coming from behind me. I was facing the wall, curled slightly on my side, the way I always sleep in that room, back to the door. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just listened. The breathing was faint. Not labored, but not quiet either. Not like sleep breathing. Like someone trying not to be noticed. Like someone crouched close by. I didn't move for minutes. Then just as suddenly it stopped. The air went flat again. My ears rang from the pressure of silence. I stayed still, counting slowly in my head. 5 minutes. 10. 20. Nothing. I finally turned over. There was no one there. The room looked exactly the same. But something had changed. I felt it in my chest. In the walls. In my teeth. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I told my grandpa I needed to leave early. He looked disappointed, but didn't press me. I packed up my things, drove 6 hours back home, and slept on my couch with the lights on. I didn't go back for Christmas. I didn't go back in the spring. And then this June, 2 weeks ago, my grandma called to tell me that they were thinking of selling the house. It wasn't a long conversation. She said it casually, like they were considering downsizing, maybe moving closer to Miami. Said the stairs were getting harder for her. Said the house was too big now. I agreed, told her it sounded like a good idea. But when I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. Because the idea of them selling the house, of someone else living there, someone else sleeping in that room, made me deeply uncomfortable. Not because I felt possessive, not because I wanted to stop them, but because I couldn't shake the thought that whoever moved and wouldn't know. They'd think it was just an old house with a lot of storage space upstairs. They wouldn't know to stay out of the narrow bedroom. They wouldn't know to sleep with their back to the door. They wouldn't know not to listen. And what if the thing, whatever it is, doesn't like being ignored? I haven't told anyone this, but the night after that phone call, I had a dream. I was back in the house, lying in the same bed, facing the wall. It was dark, but not completely, just like it is in real life when the hallway light is on. And in the dream, I turned over and looked at the door. There was something standing just outside of it. Not a shape, not a figure, just a presence. The same way heat rises off pavement in waves. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. I felt it, the way you feel someone staring at you from across a room. Then I woke up. I don't know if I believe in anything supernatural. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in demons. I don't believe in the idea that houses can be haunted in the traditional sense. But I do believe this. Places remember things. Not in some magical way, but in the way a chair remembers how to squeak, or a floorboard knows when to shift, or a room holds air differently after decades of silence. And something is up there. Not a person, not a ghost, just something. A rhythm, a habit, a pattern. Maybe it's just noise. Maybe it's nothing more than the perfect storm of wood, air, time, and suggestion. But I don't think so, because I know what I heard that first night. I know what it feels like when something stands too close behind you. And if they do sell the house, if someone new moves in, I wonder how long it will take before they start sleeping with headphones on, facing the wall, counting the footsteps overhead. I wonder if they'll hear it come down the stairs. I hope they never do, because if it walks that path again, if it steps down, pauses at the landing, and finishes the descent, I won't be there to warn them. And by the time they realize something's wrong, it'll already be in the room. After that first night, the night it came down the stairs, I became obsessed with patterns. Not just the timing of the footsteps, but the way they moved when they started, what conditions they appeared under. I started noticing more than I wanted to. There were always two passes on the loudest nights. Once from the closet to the window, and again from the window to the door. It never started right away after I went to bed, either. It waited until I was still. Like it knew. It would be a lie to say I ever got used to it. I never adjusted, but I did start developing rituals. Stupid ones, really. Every time I stayed at my grandparents' house, I would run through the same exact setup the moment I knew I'd be sleeping in that room. First, I checked the hallway. I wouldn't walk into that room until every light in the house was on. I mean every light, kitchen, dining room, hallway, even the one above the stove. I'd stand in the doorway of the room and take a deep breath. Then I'd go in, fast, moving like I was afraid to give the room time to react. Next, I would pull the dresser up against the far wall so I could plug in my charger without turning my back to the door. I started sleeping on top of the bed again around 16, but always with my back to the door. That felt important. I didn't want to see anything if I didn't have to. Most importantly, I brought my own headphones. Not the cheap wired ones either. Noise-canceling over-ears that wrap me in white noise. I wouldn't fall asleep to music because I didn't want lyrics to hide anything subtle. Just pure white static, loud enough to blur the edges of the world. I even brought a portable light once. One of those LED battery-powered ones that stick to the wall. I set it next to my bed and clicked it on. It lasted all of 15 minutes before the batteries died completely. I replaced them. It died again. I stopped bringing that light. For years, I never mentioned it again. To anyone. My friends didn't know. My cousins didn't know. I told myself maybe it was in my head. But that first night stuck with me. The sound of it coming down the stairs, the scratching at the gun case. That part was real. I knew it. The second time something unusual happened, I was 19. I had come down for the weekend to help my grandparents clean out the garage. It was summer, early July. Hot, humid, and still. The air was so thick it clung to your skin. That night, we had finished late. I was sweaty, exhausted, and half asleep when I finally laid down in that room again. I didn't bother with headphones. I was too tired to go through the full ritual. I figured maybe if I just didn't think about it, nothing would happen. The first thump came before I'd even turned the lights out. That's how I knew it was different. Usually it waited until the house was quiet, until I was still, until the night had sunk deep. But this was impatient, loud, immediate. I froze where I was, half sitting, phone still glowing in my hand. The sound traveled the same path, from one end of the upstairs room to the other. But this time, it didn't stop at the window. It kept going. Thump, thump. The sound was heavier this time, more forceful. It crossed the floor above me in a straight line, and then the entire ceiling groaned. I don't mean the usual creak of wood expanding or an old house breathing. I mean a deep, low shudder, like something heavy shifted its weight and the board strained beneath it. I stared up at the plaster, mouth dry. I thought I saw the light fixture tremble. I leapt out of bed and went straight to my car. Didn't say a word to my grandparents. Didn't bother with excuses. I drove the 20 minutes back to my parents' place and slept in my childhood bedroom for the first time in over a year. The next morning, I came back. Acted like nothing happened. My grandma asked if everything was okay. I said I had gotten a migraine and didn't want to wake them. She seemed to accept that. That's when she told me something I didn't know. Apparently, years before I was born, the upstairs was fully furnished. Her sister used to stay there when she came to visit from out of town. They had set up the narrow room as a guest bedroom. One year, her sister brought her kids, two boys around 8 or 9 at the time. They both ended up sleeping in that narrow room, and in the middle of the night, one of them woke up screaming. He said a gorilla had come out of the closet. A gorilla. It danced, he said, danced around the bed, then disappeared back into the closet. Everyone laughed about it for years. A childhood nightmare, nothing more. But after that, her sister never let the kids sleep up there again. My grandma laughed as she told me. Just a funny old story, but I felt cold all over. Because I hadn't told her which room I was in when I heard the footsteps. I hadn't said a word about the upstairs since I was 14. And yet here she was casually describing a story about that very room. One that sounded absurd on the surface, but wasn't so funny when you were the one hearing things in the middle of the night. After that, I started doing something else. Every time I visited, I'd leave my phone camera recording while I slept, just to see. I'd balance it on the corner of the desk, pointing toward the ceiling. I'd hit record, plug it in, and let it run overnight. Most mornings, I got nothing. Just hours of footage of me tossing and turning. Occasionally a dog bark in the distance, or my grandpa coughing in the hallway. But one night, at around 2:17 a.m., the footage showed something strange. It started with a low, creaking noise, barely audible over the hum of the ceiling fan. Then came the footsteps. They moved slow, deliberate. They crossed the room above me, just like always. But at the moment the last footstep landed, the image on the phone flickered. Only for a second. A single frame dropped out. Then another, 3 minutes later. The audio crackled both times like a weak radio signal. No figure, no sado, nothing dramatic. Just a subtle digital hiccup, like something was interfering. I didn't sleep the rest of the night after I watched that video. I deleted it the next day. I stopped recording after that. Not because I didn't want answers, but because I was afraid I'd find one. These days, I still stay at their house from time to time. Holidays mostly. I still sleep in that same room. Still hear the footsteps. And even though I tell myself they're just the sounds of an old house settling, I know better. I know what I heard that night when it came downstairs. I know what it felt like when something scraped across the gun case door. I know what the ceiling sounded like when it groaned under a weight that no one acknowledged. And I know that whatever walks up there is real. Not a ghost, not a demon, nothing dramatic, just something that exists in the quiet. I haven't heard it come down the stairs since that one night, but I still sleep with my back to the door and headphones on. Still check the hallway twice before turning in. Still keep my phone within reach, just in case. Because if it ever comes down again, I want to be ready. And if it opens the door, I want to be asleep. I never liked my grandparents' house. Even when I was little, long before I could explain why, I hated being there alone. It wasn't that anything bad had ever happened. It wasn't even a creepy-looking house, just a long, low-slung brick ranch-style house set far back from the road, with a wide driveway, a few aging trees in the front yard, and a perfectly trimmed lawn that my grandpa still mowed himself. The kind of house that smelled like lemon cleaner, cigarettes, and old furniture. Familiar, warm, supposed to feel safe. But there was something about the upstairs. I never went up there without someone else. Not when I was a kid, not when I was a teenager, not now. I'm 23 and I still won't go up those stairs unless someone's right behind me. Even then, I rush. There's this tight feeling I get in my stomach when I pass the top step, like my body knows something my mind refuses to process. It started with something small, just a feeling. The kind of instinct you don't really question as a kid. You just obey it. Like how I wouldn't go into the basement alone, or how I never walked past the edge of the woods behind our house after sunset. You didn't need a reason. You just knew not to. For me, that place was the second floor of my grandparents' house. As a kid, I'd only go up there when we had to grab old boxes from storage, or when my grandma wanted help putting up Christmas decorations. The rooms up there were never used. There was a guest room, an old playroom that hadn't been touched in years, a dusty bathroom with a broken shower, and a narrow bedroom. That narrow bedroom always stuck out. I remember the layout clearly. The door sticks a little when you try to open it, and it scrapes faintly along the carpet. On either side, there's a closet, mirrored sliding doors on the left, a louvered wooden one on the right that never quite shut all the way. There's a bed pressed into the center of the room, directly across from a single window with yellowing blinds. It's always too warm in that room. The air is thicker somehow, like it doesn't circulate properly. But it was never the layout that bothered me. It was the feeling that something in that room was watching me from the second I stepped over the threshold. I never told my grandparents about how much I hated it. It felt childish, like admitting I was scared of the dark again. But that was years ago. I was 14 when they started having me sleep downstairs, and that's when things changed. Before that, I'd sleep in the den or the main guest room, both downstairs across from the kitchen. But then they started sleeping in separate rooms. Something about my grandpa's snoring or my grandma needing her own space. Whatever the reason, they rearranged the sleeping arrangements. My grandma took the main bedroom. My grandpa moved to the den, and I got moved to the old office, which had been hastily turned into a spare bedroom. Nothing special, just a mattress, a lamp, and a dresser with a crooked drawer. The thing about that room was that it sat directly underneath the narrow bedroom upstairs. The first time I heard it was the same night I started sleeping in there. It was probably around 1 a.m. I was lying in bed, earbuds in, trying to scroll through my phone quietly. The house was dead silent. I remember the quiet was the kind that hums in your ears, so still that you hear your own pulse. And then I heard it. Thump. It was just one footstep at first. Dull, muffled, but unmistakable. Followed by another. Thump. Thump. I paused, held my breath. It continued. Slow, evenly spaced. As if someone was walking from one side of the room directly above me to the other. My blood ran cold. I knew that room was empty. No one had been up there all day. My grandparents' rooms were both on the first floor, and the sound, whatever it was heavy. It had weight to it. It wasn't the house settling. It wasn't a pipe groaning or a piece of furniture creaking under old pressure. It sounded exactly like footsteps. Someone walking, steady, slow, directly over me. It stopped at the far end of the room. Silence fell again, heavy and total. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like 20 straight minutes, heart hammering, every muscle in my body locked. I waited for another sound, anything, but nothing came. Eventually, I convinced myself that I'd imagined it, that I'd heard a raccoon on the roof or something, that the house was just old and made noise, like all old houses do. I finally fell asleep. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same rhythm, same pattern, from the closet side of the room to the window. Then nothing. I started counting the seconds between steps, started noticing how they always started and ended in the same places. That made it worse. It felt deliberate. After the third night in a row, I snapped. I grabbed my pillow, tiptoed down the hallway, and knocked softly on my grandpa's door. He grumbled something, half asleep, and I whispered that I heard noises upstairs. He mumbled something about the house being old, that it creaked, then flipped on the dining room light and told me to go back to bed. I did, mostly because I didn't want to deal with him getting annoyed. I lay there, staring at the wall, bathed in the faint light from the dining room, feeling marginally safer. For a little while, it was quiet. Then it started again. Only this time, it didn't stop at the window. It paused, just long enough for me to register that the sound had changed. Then I heard the first stair creak. 1, 2, 3, a slow, methodical descent. 4, 5, pause, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Silence. The stairs ended just outside my room. My stomach turned to ice. I didn't move a muscle. I was staring at the open doorway, watching the glow from the dining room spill across the carpet. Every instinct in my body was screaming. My chest felt tight. I was holding my breath without realizing it. Then the sound shifted, scratching. It was unmistakable. Long, dragging, deliberate scratching like fingernails or something harder being pulled downward. It came from across the room, from my grandpa's old gun case in the corner. I knew the sound too well. I'd open that case myself. I could hear the slight tapping as the door rattled on its hinges with every pull of the scratching. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. My throat felt locked. The only thing I could do was hide. I pulled the blanket over my head and curled into my cell, gripping the comforter so tight my fingers went numb. I stayed like that until morning. When daylight came and the house stirred awake, I told them again what I heard. My grandpa rolled his eyes. My grandma laughed it off, said my cousin once claimed she heard footsteps too. After that night, I started sleeping under the bed. I didn't care how ridiculous it looked. I'd drape a sheet over the side so nothing could see in, wrap myself like a burrito in blankets, plug in my headphones, and do my best to ignore everything. And it never stopped. Even now, all these years later, every time I stay there, I hear the footsteps. Without fail. Always at night. Always from the same place. They start on one end of the upstairs room and end at the other. Sometimes just once. Sometimes twice. Always slow. Always deliberate. And no matter how old I get, how rational I try to be, how many times I hear it, I still can't sleep in that room without my back turned to the door and headphones cranked high. It's never come down the stairs again. Not since that first time. But every time I hear that thump start above me, I brace myself. Because I know one night it might. I remember the cold before I remember anything else. The kind of cold that doesn't bite, not right away, but slowly seeps in through your sleeves and up your spine. It was early, too early for most of the city to be awake, and the mist made everything feel a little quieter than usual. The kind of quiet where even your footsteps sound unsure. I was wearing my usual layers, baggy black sweatpants I'd had for years, oversized hoodie, a baseball cap tugged down low over my face. From a distance, I probably looked like a teenage boy skipping school, which was honestly the point. It's just easier to move through the world that way sometimes. Less attention, fewer assumptions. That morning, like most mornings, I didn't think twice about what I had on. It was routine. Get up at 4:30, throw on whatever was clean, grab my bag, grab some food, and walk the 15-minute stretch to the bus stop. That morning's banana was overripe, spotted with brown and softer than I liked. Still, I ate it while walking, more out of habit than hunger. It left my hands sticky, that sweet smell clinging to my fingers no matter how much I wiped them on my jacket. I was half awake, mentally arguing with myself about whether I'd grab my usual Starbucks before or after practice. I kept walking. The neighborhood I lived in wasn't upscale, but it wasn't terrible either. Just rows of duplexes and apartment buildings, old cracked sidewalks, the occasional busted street lamp that nobody bothered to report anymore. At 5 a.m., it didn't look dangerous, just empty. The fog gave everything a washed-out look, like a TV left on mute. I reached the corner where I usually cross to get to the main road. A dim streetlight flickered above the intersection, casting long shadows across the wet pavement. To my left, there was an alleyway tucked between two old brick buildings. I passed it 1,000 times before and never once looked twice. That morning was different. Out of the alley stepped a man. He didn't stumble or drift out. He stepped deliberate, precise. Tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, maybe more. Dressed all in black, from the hoodie to the jeans, and a dark ski mask pulled over his face. He appeared so suddenly I thought, at first, that he was just someone out for a weird early jog. But he didn't jog. He stopped in front of me, halfway out of the shadows. I kept walking. My brain didn't process what I was seeing fast enough. There's a lag, you know? When something doesn't fit, the mind fumbles for a reasonable explanation. Maybe he was just waiting for someone. Maybe he was cold. Maybe he... Put down your fucking purse. The words didn't land. Not really. Not right away. I stopped walking, but still held the banana peel in one hand, my bag slung over my other shoulder. He was pointing something at me. My eyes adjusted. It was a gun. Small, black metal. The kind that looks almost like a toy until you see it from the wrong end. I froze. He said it again, this time louder. Put down your bags. Now. My voice sounded weird in my own ears. Okay, I said. I'm putting them down. I kept my movements slow. I bent at the knees and dropped the banana peel and my backpack beside the curb. I looked at him, really looked this time. His eyes were wide, not nervous wide, wild wide. Like he was running too hot inside. Like whatever he was about to do wasn't planned. My gut twisted. Walk over here, he barked, pointing toward the alley. Get on the fucking ground. I took a shaky breath. Okay, I'm coming. I stepped slowly toward him, heart hammering, my stomach rolling over itself like I was going to puke. I wanted to think clearly, but all I could focus on was how absurd it all felt. I could still taste banana in my mouth, feel the stickiness on my palm. The streetlight behind me buzzed and flickered again. My head throbbed with every heartbeat. He motioned harder, stepping back into the shadowed edge of the alley. Down, on the ground. Now, I dropped to my knees first, then lay out on the sidewalk like he asked. I kept my head down and my voice steady. "My stuff's over there," I said. "Please just take it." That's when he moved closer. Fast. His footsteps clapped against the wet concrete. Suddenly, his weight was on me, one knee pressing into my back, one hand shoving my shoulder flat. The gun pressed against my head now. The metal felt cold and oily. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. I could hear his breathing above me, fast and erratic. That's when I felt him pause. I swear I could feel him hesitate. Maybe it was the way my voice cracked. Maybe it was the pitch, the way I'd said, "Please." Maybe it was the curve of my hip through the baggy pants. Whatever it was, I felt a shift in his body language. The realization. He stood up. "Come with me," he said, motioning down the alley. And that's when it really sank in. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't about money or my phone. I knew that alley. I knew where it led. Nothing but a fenced-in lot at the end, a broken chain-link gate, and a couple of trash bins. No cameras. No houses facing it. No way to be seen from the street. I could see in my head. I could also see the headlines. The way they'd worded. Victim was walking alone before dawn. Suspect remains at large. I didn't move. He stepped closer again, furious now. I said, "Come with me." I opened my mouth and words came out. "Okay, I'm coming. Please just don't shoot." My voice was calm, too calm. I remember wondering why I didn't sound more afraid. But my brain was already forming a plan. I stood up slowly and stepped, just once, twice, backward. Not toward the alley, but toward the street. He turned slightly, thinking I was coming along, gun still pointed loosely in my direction, but no longer fixed on my chest. I saw it in that second, a mistake. His focus shifted away from me and toward where he wanted to go. I ran, not a stumble, not a cautious jog. I sprinted, full tilt, arms pumping, knees high, feet slapping the sidewalk. My breath tore out of my lungs in ragged gasps. Somewhere in the distance I realized I was screaming, not words, just a long, rising sound torn straight from my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. My legs were pure instinct, my body on autopilot. I crossed the next block, then another. I made it past the corner market, past the broken payphone that always smelled like beer, past the gas station with the busted ice machine. I don't know how far I went. 6 blocks? 7? More? I only stopped when my lungs gave out and my knees felt like rubber. I ducked into a stairwell beside an old building and collapsed, pressing myself into the cold metal door, trying to shrink into the shadows. Every sound felt like it could be footsteps. Every shape in the fog might have been him. I stayed there until my breathing evened out. Then, slowly, I circled a long way back to my apartment. I checked behind me constantly, took alleys, zigzagged between streets, hoping he wasn't following, hoping he hadn't seen where I went. My apartment never looked so strange before. Normal but off, like I'd aged years since I left it. Inside, I locked everything. Deadbolt, chain, even wedged a chair under the knob. I sat in my kitchen, hands trembling, the adrenaline refusing to leave. I called the police. They came. I told them everything. They checked the alley. Found nothing. Just my banana peel turning brown on the sidewalk and maybe a scuffed mark from my shoes where I'd taken off. He was gone. I gave a description. They were polite, apologetic, efficient, but you could see in their faces they'd heard stories like this before. Sometimes they ended differently. Sometimes they didn't end at all. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. In the weeks that followed, I avoided that route entirely. Changed my schedule, carried pepper spray, took self-defense classes. I flinched whenever someone walked behind me, no matter the time of day. I couldn't handle fog, couldn't even hold a banana for a long while. It sounds stupid, but it's true. I think about that moment often, the shift in his tone when he told me to go into the alley. That was the dividing line, the moment when everything could have changed forever. And I think about how close I came to listening. Just a few more steps, one more hesitation, If I hadn't run right then, if I tried to negotiate, if he'd been a second faster. But I didn't.